I'm from Cocho, and we're going to be looking a little bit around ransomware attacks and, how you can react as a business or organization. So ransomware, as we know, it's now a case of when, not if. More and more people are being hit by data breaches, ransomware attacks, and it's just becoming a lot more prevalent. So we're going to look at some real-world cyber attacks, so some real-world breaches that have happened, and just going to take you through some practical steps that you can look at to help protect yourselves and your organization. So we're going to do a quick introduction, discuss some breaches, and then I'm going to look a little bit around social engineering and sort of identity tactics that attackers are still using. Seems to be the common thread currently. And then some of the realities of 2FA flooding, because that's been quite big and quite prevalent. And then looking at how to strengthen your cloud posture management, and also harmonizing sort of your on-premise and cloud infrastructure. And then we'll look at some sort of solutions to that as well. So a little bit of introduction about myself. So I'm Anna Webb. I'm from a company called Cocho. We used to be Third Space and TIG. We've merged and rebranded as Cocho around about this time last year. So I'm head of security operations, looking after the managed security services, as well as some other sort of bespoke services that we offer within the security operations arena. I've got a technical background, although it's quite rusty at the moment. I do try to keep my hand in as much as possible, just so that the analysts and my engineers feel that they've got some kind of support. I've been in IT roughly 26, 27 years, and 7 of those have been in the cybersecurity industry. I was sort of doing a bit of security in an IT arena prior to that, but the last 7 years have been dedicated specifically to cybersecurity. Recently gained my CISSP. If anybody's been through that, you'll know the challenge. It's quite a heavy certification to get through. And one of the big things that I'm very proud of is the work that I do with the University of South Wales. So I'm from Wales. Cocho is based in London, and we have an office in Cardiff as well, which is where our operations centre is. But we've worked really, really closely with the University of South Wales and their Cyber Academy to help develop the syllabus that they're using, to help input into sort of feedback with regards to what they're teaching the upcoming analysts of tomorrow, and making sure that they're sort of keeping ahead of the game as well. I also help with developing students in order to get them ready for the workplace. So sort of looking at areas around interacting with others, not just the technical side of things. Some of the things that can be a bit of a challenge. So that's enough about me. Okay, so let's talk about some data breaches. So I am going to refer to my laptop because I can't remember all the details off the top of my head, unfortunately. So on the screen is a list of the data breaches that have happened between January, 1st of January, and the end of February this year so far. And we're only in March, end of March. So I'm going to take you through a couple of them. So the Activision one, which happened in Feb 2023. So anybody who knows of Activision knows that they make Call of Duty. So if you play Call of Duty, you'll know about this company. So they were attacked, and the hackers were able to gain access to sensitive employee data and content schedules. So these were exfiltrated from the company's computer systems. The breach actually happened in December, but the company has only revealed it to the public more recently. And it was discovered that the attack happened because an employee's credentials were obtained in a phishing attack, and that's what allowed the hackers to then subsequently use those credentials to infiltrate the rest of the system. So it's that common theme that, you know, phishing attack, social engineering, it's one of the big things that is still catching companies out. Atlassian, a lot of people have heard of Atlassian. They seem to have suffered a serious data breach, which the hackers themselves announced along with the data. So they didn't just say, hey, we've hacked Atlassian. They also said, here's what we managed to pull from this £44 billion company. So the hacking group was known as SegedSec, and they claim to have broken into the computer systems of Atlassian and have exfiltrated data relating to staff, as well as floor plans of the Sydney and San Francisco offices. So there was things like names, email addresses, departments that the staff worked in, and other information relating to the employment of these employees at Atlassian. So you can imagine, could be all sorts involved there if it's in the HR system. Initially, Atlassian blamed one of their third-party vendors, Envoy, which is an office coordination software company. But they eventually sort of owned up and said, no, do you know, it wasn't them, it was us. So that was quite a prevalent one. Reddit. So they suffered a breach on the 5th of February. And again, it was a single employee's credentials that allowed the attack to happen. So they were able to gain access to internal documents, code, as well as some internal dashboards and business systems. Doesn't seem like a huge amount, but you know, it's pretty bad that somebody's got into your system, even if the data that they've pulled doesn't seem particularly relevant to the outside world, maybe. There was no indication that their primary systems had been hacked. So that's, you know, the part of the stack where Reddit stores the majority of their data. But there was limited contact information for employees. So again, it's employees that had been targeted. There was no evidence to suggest that any of their non-public data had been accessed. So they're sort of playing it down as not such a bad attack. Personally speaking, if you've been infiltrated, there's a likelihood they could do it again. And there's a few coming up that are examples of where a company has been attacked multiple times. JD Sports, that was 10 million people had their data and personal information accessed. So JD Sports, I don't know if you know, but they own things like Size, Millets, Blacks. So it's not just JD Sports. And their CFO, Neil Greenhalgh, said that the company was advising its customers to be vigilant around things like scam emails, calls, and texts, and they were providing details on how to report these. Not quite sure if that's a good way to respond. It seems a little bit sort of like, well, we'll leave it to you to look after yourselves. So T-Mobile is one of the ones. So they've had more than one data breach. So the latest data breach affected around 37 million of both their sort of pay-as-you-go and prepaid customers. They had their data accessed. It was only discovered on the 5th of January, but it turned out that the intruders had been in their system since November last year. So that's almost a full 3 months of the hackers roaming around, being able to see what was in the systems. So it's not the first time, like I said, that they've fallen victim. So last year, they had another attack, which was 76 million customers who had their data compromised. Now, the the biggest concern around both these attacks is that after the attack last year, T-Mobile pledged that it would spend $150 million to upgrade its data security. So given the recent attack, it does raise serious questions as to whether they have actually done anything at all, and whether that money has been well spent. MailChimp, similar again, they've had more than one data breach. Literally 6 months after the first one, they had another one. So the threat actor was, again, able to gain access to their systems because of a social engineering attack. They didn't access a huge amount. It was 133 MailChimp accounts. But the main point around this attack is that the way that they were attacked 6 months prior was exactly or very similar to the way that they were attacked this time. So again, it's like something there isn't being covered. Those holes are not being blocked, because if you can do it once and then you can do it again 6 months later, that company has not taken action to review their security posture and find out exactly where the holes are. And obviously then Twitter, being one of the sort of bigger ones this year, so their data's been continuously bought and sold on the dark web throughout 2022, and it doesn't look like 2023 is going to be any different for them. They've lost a bank of email addresses belonging to around 200 million Twitter users. Now, you think all the celebrities as well that use Twitter, and that's being sold on the dark web for as little as $2. So, you know, it's quite a low amount of money. So the flaw that led to this leak was fixed in January 2022, but the data is still being bought and sold. So, you know, there's an awful lot that's still going on with these data breaches. So looking at some of the notable data breaches of 2022, we've already mentioned Twitter, which sort of happened last year, but as you know, it's still ongoing. LastPass, that's quite a big one. You know, a lot of people use LastPass to store their passwords and their security information. So this happened in December last year, and this was their second data breach. They were able to infiltrate the company's cloud database and access a copy of the data vaults, basically, where there was millions of details belonging to customers. Again, the attackers gained access through stolen credentials and keys belonging to a LastPass employee. It's starting to show that that sort of layer 8, as we call it, the human element, is one of the weaker points within your security infrastructure. It also exposed unencrypted subscriber account information, usernames, company names, billing addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and even IP addresses. So things that could be used by an attacker to have a very, very targeted phishing attack on any of those companies of those details that had been sort of exposed. Uber is another one that has suffered a data breach. This was 77 million, is it 77 million? Sorry. 77,000, sorry, employee records. Again, they're targeting employees, which is quite concerning. Uber fell victim to a cyber attack, not because of necessarily their own security problems, but because of the security problems of a vendor that they do business with. So again, it's that third-party supply chain that needs to be looked at. The hacker in the Uber, just as a matter of interest really, the hacker in the Uber attack was actually only 18 years old. So, and he is believed to be associated with with a group, a cyber criminal group. But again, because he was 18 years old, it was picked up because he was bragging about it on cybersecurity forums, and he actually spoke to a cybersecurity researcher called Corbin Leo about what he'd done. Okta, a lot of people use Okta for sort of single sign-on. They've had 3 data breaches in 2022. So the last one was in December, and then they had previous data breaches in March and August 2022. So this is the third data breach, as I said, with previous incidents being in March and August. And while the company did not reveal the extent, so they haven't told us the extent of what has happened during the previous breaches, the reoccurrence of another breach, so a third breach, sort of suggests that they do need to take a look at what's going on with their security and look to strengthen their security posture in order to protect their customers and their data better. So the last 2, well, the last 3 on there. So the Zotop business one is interesting because they were actually fined $1.9 million by the state of New York for not revealing the data breach. That's quite a hefty fine. So, and the breach itself took place in 2018. So it's taken this long to get to the point that we know about the breach and that they've been fined because of it. It was an unauthorized third party who managed to access their payment system. So this was actually getting credit card details and payment details from customers. So according to the statement from the New York State Attorney General's office, the payment processor, so the person actually processing the payments, had informed Shen that a major credit card network and credit card issuing bank had discovered this Zotop system had been infiltrated and the card data had been stolen. But basically, they did nothing at the time. So that's not good. The Microsoft breach, that was an unsecured or badly configured endpoint that was apparently discovered by SOC Radar rather than by Microsoft. The leak exposed sensitive information on numerous companies and their clients to malicious actors, which could lead to a variety of negative implications and impacts and outcomes for those companies. And then the Capital One data breach is one of those areas that sort of is quite scary because it happened because of an ex-employee. So when we talk in the industry about your joiners, movers, leavers process, least privilege, this is the reason why. So in June 2022, former Amazon Web Services employee, Paige Thompson, was found guilty for her involvement in the Capital One data breach, which happened in 2019. Her extensive knowledge of the cloud server vulnerabilities enabled her to exploit the weakness in Capital One's infrastructure and steal personal information of over 100 million people. So this information included names, dates of birth, social security numbers, which is, you know, it's a big deal, and other personal identifying information. It occurred because she knew that there was a misconfiguration in one of the systems, and she was able to access that sensitive customer information. So after gaining the access, she then posted the information to a public repo on GitHub and then bragged about it on social media. So a lot of the time, these hackers are getting caught because they're bragging about it. The companies are finding out that this has happened because the hackers are bragging about it rather than because they actually know that somebody's got into their system. Oop. There we go. So what is the cost of a data breach? So there's some stats there on the screen. So $4.35 million US. It's quite a big figure. That is the global average cost of a data breach, according to the IBM Cost of Data Breach Report 2022. So I don't know if any of you access this report at all, but there's some really good information in it around data breaches, around cost of ransomware. And so the average cost has reached an all-time high in 2022. I'm wondering what it's going to do in 2023. It increased from 0.11 million to 4.35 million in 2022, which, you know, there's been a growth there, which is not a good thing. Ransomware was responsible for, or was the outcome of 11% of those data breaches in 2022. And every 11 seconds, a new organization falls victim to some kind of cyber attack. And there's 4,000 attacks every day, according to the Department of Justice. That's an awful lot of attacks. And not all of them make the news either. And ransomware as a service is fueling a lot of this as well. So where you're able to go to somebody and say, I want you to attack or infiltrate this particular company. I know nothing about how to actually hack, but I know you do, and I'm going to pay you to do it. So that's, you know, ransomware as a service is basically our business model between the ransomware operators and their affiliates. The affiliates pay to launch the ransomware attack against whoever they want to. So this is why it's called ransomware as a service. It allows those affiliates who are lacking in skill or time to develop what they need to do to develop that ransomware variant, and it allows them to be up and running quite quickly and quite affordably. And they're easy to find on the dark web because, you know, if you Google stuff on the normal World Wide Web, you can look for stuff on the dark web, and everybody's advertising their services. So, you know, where we see things advertised legitimately on the web, you can find people advertising ransomware as a service on the dark web. So the big thing with regards to the cost of the data breach is that it's currently the highest it's been in the history of the report, and the report has been going since about 2016. There's a 2.6% increase, and you know, there's been a 12.7% increase in the last 2 years. So those figures are quite shocking. So what is the cost of ransomware? So $4.54 million, that is the average cost of a ransomware attack. $1 million, so that's the remote work, where remote working is a factor in causing a breach. So obviously since the pandemic, the way the world works has changed, and companies are still fighting to catch up with what they need to do to secure their remote workers. And not everybody's gone back to the office either. So it's not as if we've, you know, gone back to the previous way of working and everything sort of goes back to normal. We've now got this mix of hybrid working as well, which causes other difficulties. 19%, so that's the frequency that breaches are caused by stolen or compromised credentials. Phishing attacks, social engineering, that's where those credentials come from. And then 59% of organizations do not deploy zero trust. So they don't look at least privilege. They don't look at always assume breach. And they don't always seek to verify. And that's not a good thing, particularly in today's working world. And then 45%, that's the amount of breaches that have actually occurred in the cloud. So that's not too bad, maybe, because it's less than 50%, but it's still a very, very high figure. Some slightly better stats, I guess, but it's still on the cost of ransomware. And that's 2.66 million. So the average cost savings that are associated if you've got an incident response plan and an incident response team, and that plan is tested regularly. Does everybody here have an incident response plan? Yeah, hands up. I've got one. Do you all have an incident response team? It doesn't necessarily have to be a security team. It could be anyone that sort of is just involved in that incident response plan, because the incident response plan can be wider than IT or wider than security. It can involve marketing. It can involve updating things, you know, to your clients. So it's good to see there's a few hands, but not everybody's got that in place. 29 days, that's the saving in response time for those who have implemented extended detection and response technologies. Those are not always options for very small businesses, and they're not always options that larger organizations will consider. But it does save you in days of downtime. And then 12 years, that's consecutive years that the healthcare industry has had the highest average cost of a breach. We all know about WannaCry that hit the NHS, and, you know, unfortunately, funding, it's always down to resources, that doesn't help with that figure. So based on the cost of data breach report, America, as you may or may not have expected, $9.44 million, that's the average cost of a breach in the United States, which is the highest out of the 17 countries that appear on the report. There we go. So just looking at some of those tactics that we've already sort of seen in the data breaches that I've mentioned. So social engineering and identity-centric tactics, you know, they're there to, you know, try and catch you off guard. Yeah, somebody comes up to you, looks at your badge. Oh, hi, what's your name? What company do you work for? Next thing they do, they can go and look at you on LinkedIn. They can ask you questions. There's a video that does the rounds every now and again on YouTube where there's a reporter in the street asking people questions. Oh, hi, we just want to see how, you know, security-minded you are. Would you mind telling us, you know, what your password is? No, I'm not telling you my password. Oh, right, okay, so have you got a pet? Yeah, I've got a pet. All right, so what's your dog's name? Is it a dog or a cat? Oh, it's a dog. And there's this whole conversation, and by the end of, you know, by the end of it, I think it's like a 5-minute video, it's not even that long, they've talked to about 5 different people or 6 different people, and at the end of that video, they've all revealed their password in one way, shape, or form. So, you know, or at least elements that a hacker could use to, you know, to guess. It's not difficult. It's not difficult. You know, there's an increasing amount of personal information available online. Everything is online. Everything we're asked to do is, can you do it online? Can you send me your email address? Can you fill in this document? And it's got your date of birth, your passport number. All those sort of things are now online. So all this information is out there, and it's money for somebody. And then obviously COVID-19 has driven a lot of this and accelerated it. Because of the pandemic, we've had to work from home. Because of the pandemic, people who never thought in a million years that they would work from home are now working from home. And they're connected to their own internet at home. They're connected through their ISP, whether it's Sky, whether it's BT. We see a lot of people who use their home computer because, you know, there's a lot of people in tech who are gamers, a lot of people who are not in tech who are gamers, and they've got their nice gaming rig, 2 big screens, you know, a nice desktop PC that's all singing, all dancing, the last thing they want to do is unplug everything to plug it into their company laptop so that they can work. So what do? Well, can I do it from my home PC? And a lot of companies are like, yeah, if that works, fine. But the difference is this PC comes under policies, conditional access, all sorts going on that control what happens on your company PC. On your home PC, have you updated your antivirus? Have you updated, have you got Windows Defender? What have you got? How is it managed? The difference being, because your home computer is not subject to policies, it doesn't stop you downloading certain things, doesn't stop you using certain pieces of software that can leave you vulnerable. So, there's an awful lot of things there that can help with that sort of social engineering and identity attack. And then we've had the 2FA flooding as well. I mean, thankfully, most people are moving to MFA, so it's not just that, two-factor authentication. But, social engineering, So the two-factor authentication, this is the additional layer of security that's added to actually protect you. But we've now got attackers out there using this protection to gain access, because basically they keep flooding you with requests. And you get to the point where you don't know whether it's one that you've requested or one that isn't genuine. And in the end, you just go, accept. And once you've done that, that's the first step for them being able to get in. It does overwhelm and it does confuse, particularly if, I've got, my mum's 74, right? She's pretty with it. But she gets problems with, the 2FA flooding, and it's like, yeah, unless you know that you have initiated that request, you do not click on it. And it is aimed to catch you off guard. Cool. And what about your cloud security posture? How are you looking after that? We saw on one of the previous slides that 45% of breaches in 2022 were in the cloud. So how can you look after your cloud security? We at Cocho offer a security posture assessment, which covers your cloud security, can cover hybrid as, and sort of on-prem. But cloud posture management is that practice of continually monitoring and improving what your organization's security posture is in the cloud. It refers to the overall security and measures that an organization has in place. That's your security posture. And it involves assessing, analyzing, what is going on within your cloud at the current time, and then identifying gaps, vulnerabilities, and looking for, what remediation measures do we need to do to plug those holes, to stop those areas that hackers could get into. It includes implementing security controls, such as access controls, network security, and more importantly, encryption where necessary, as well as monitoring and logging and detecting and responding to the security incidents that come from any type of XDR, EDR, SIEM system that you might be using or that you might have implemented. So, looking at the cloud posture assessment, that is something that would be able to help you with, looking at whether you have least privilege implemented, whether your multi-factor authentication is in place as it should be, and whether it's working. Do you regularly review and update your security policies? Anybody here? Do you regularly review and update your security policies? That's good. Yeah, good show of hands. And monitoring and logging activity. It doesn't have to be in a SIEM, even if you're logging it in you're sort of managing your log-on events and things like that. The biggest thing is to train your employees. We've already talked about how much social engineering and, you know, employees giving away their credentials unwittingly have caused, you know, or been the cause of attacks. Training employees, the human element is always going to be the bottom line. And that's the really, really important thing. And also, it allows your employees to be safe at home as well. So if they are using the setup that I explained previously, they'll start to think, well, do I need something additional on my home machine if I'm being allowed to do that? How, you know, VPN, that sort of stuff. You know, and make sure that you do perform those regular assessments and audits on your security. It's very important. We have a lot of questions around, you know, I've got a hybrid network or a hybrid infrastructure. It's no different. As long as you're conducting that risk assessment to see where the gaps are and you're looking at maintaining resilience, you need to have a resilience strategy. You know, if something is physical and it falls over, what are you going to do? Do you have a way to back it up to the cloud? Do you have a way to spin up a virtual machine that's going to allow you to, you know, replace it? Or do you need an extra piece of tin sat on the ground that you can just fail over to? Have a resilience strategy and implement that redundancy as well where necessary. Deploy your security controls. It shouldn't matter whether you're using on-prem, cloud, or hybrid. You should still have relevant security controls in place. You know, you need to protect against those potential threats such as malware, viruses, and all sorts of cyber attacks. And again, monitor and test. Is it working? Does my DR plan work? For instance, ransomware is now the major cause of the requirement to invoke a DR plan. It used to be power outage, and that's now second, but ransomware, 3.6% of DR plans that are being invoked are because of ransomware. So what's the solution? So we need to mitigate for these cyber attacks. We need to train the employees. I'm going to come back to that every single time. Train your employees. Everything is about people, process, technology. You can have all the best technology in the world, but if you haven't trained the people and you haven't got the processes to respond, then this technology down here is worth nothing. Use strong passwords or go passwordless. You know, that is the big move, is to get rid of this whole sort of mindset of, oh, I need to write it down on a piece of paper, or I need to write it down on a Post-it. I've had so many examples recently of the fact that people are still doing that. Keep your software up to date. Patching is very, very important. There was a new CV that came out last week to do with Outlook and Microsoft. If you were patching and you had your patches on Patch Tuesday, that would have been mitigated as part of your standard roll-up in last week's Patch Tuesday. Use that two-factor, multi-factor authentication, multi-factor where possible, and implement network security, your firewalls, your intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems. If you're not sure, seek expert advice around it, because firewalls can be cumbersome. Back up your data. That's always an important one. If data doesn't exist in 3 places, does it actually exist? And then establish an incident response plan. So we had a good show of hands for some who've got an incident response plan. Very important. But it's even more important to test, regularly test that incident response plan. We're a big advocate of Cyber Essentials because it's a very, very good baseline to start with. It allows you, you know, for relatively low cost, particularly for the smaller to medium-sized businesses, you know, to implement an improvement in your cybersecurity. And it does protect you against those sort of common online threats. It does give you competitive advantage if you're bidding for sort of government contracts. and it helps with compliance as well. It shows your customers, your vendors, your third-party suppliers that you do take security seriously. So finally, we've actually got a free security posture assessment. I've mentioned the word several times, worth just under £10,000 that you can win. So please come and see us at our stand and ask us any questions you'd like about security, but come and enter that draw for the free security posture assessment, because we'd like to help you be better. Any questions? No tough ones, mind, right?
Thank you for the informative presentation. One of the things we find is challenging is the testing of the incident response plan without breaking the bank, as it were. So what kind of advice can you give from your own clients' experiences?
So the thing with testing response plans, it's the same with DR, right? DR is always, if you're testing your DR strategy or your business continuity strategy, you always think that you've got to have double the kit so that you can fail it over and all the rest of it. With incident response, you don't have to do a full incident response every time. Sometimes it's just a walkthrough. It's just getting a group of the right stakeholders together and sort of sitting down for an hour or two, so you're not taking too many people out of their working day, and sort of working through that, sort of brainstorming each step and how would that work, and thinking of scenarios that might sort of provoke discussion around how you could do that incident response better. Obviously, at some stage, you do need to do like a full-blown incident response, but I think you can still test your incident response plan regardless of, you know, sort of thinking about the cost constraints. You know, if you can do it, just do it with a small group of people. Do a walkthrough, do a tabletop exercise. Just try and break it down into a smaller event. And then maybe once a year, if you can plan for it, do like a full-blown, realistic event to see if you can do it that way. But yeah, typically with us, our incident response, we sort of review our policies and procedures within security every 6 months to a year, depending on where they are in the schedule. But we always look at if we've invoked incident response, sometimes that's the best way to work on it. And then it's having that sort of follow-up afterwards and the sort of lessons learned and, right, what can we change? But just walking through it sometimes is the easiest way to go, actually, things have changed in the last 3 months, and I know that if we did that, that wouldn't work, or, you know, this role has changed slightly, so we'd need to bring somebody else in, or we've got a new marketing department, so we could maybe use them to sort of publicize things outside. So it all depends on how you want to do it.
This tabletop exercise is what we currently do, yes.
Yeah.
So moving on to disaster recovery, it's a bigger challenge, isn't it? How do you test that?
Yeah, disaster recovery is a bigger challenge because unless you've got a cold or hot site that you can fail over to, then, you know, it is going to cost you money. And I know you know, if you've got physical infrastructure that you need to test for DR, because typically, you know, cloud tends to be a lot easier, but physical DR is a lot more difficult. There are suppliers that will sort of loan you equipment to do a cut-down version. Sometimes even just testing your backups is enough to test that you know, can I restore this much data and compare it and making sure it is what we've got today. It's just finding those little ways of doing it without it, you know, blowing the budget completely.
Thank you.
No problem.
I heard that American Defense Department have now invented a system that they can't be hacked anymore. Is that true? And if so, what system are they using?
I don't know, to be honest. Believe me, if somebody says that there is a system out there that can't be hacked, there is somebody 5 steps ahead of them trying to hack it. And all systems have vulnerabilities. All systems have vulnerabilities. And the biggest one is right here. Yeah? As we said, human element is the biggest vulnerability. They will always remain, unless everything becomes autonomous and all the rest of it, and we're still here, there will always remain this vulnerability. And you know, if it's an off day and you haven't had enough coffee and you couldn't sleep last night, you are going to be off your game, and you know, the best of us get caught out. So I don't know what the system is. I'm going to find out. But yeah, there will always be a vulnerability, and if there is a system that they say is unhackable, somebody will find a way of hacking it. Oops, sorry.
No. In incident response, given the unlikely interest in the police of dealing with incidents, how much value is there in the forensic capturing of the system? Because quite often that can be quite a delay in your recovery.
Yeah.
Any comments on that?
I've seen both sides of this coin, because, yeah, there has been this disinterest in raising things to the police, because they basically go, we can't be bothered with dealing with that. What I will say is, I know in South Wales, they've started, and it's being driven by somebody within the South Wales Police. He's a detective in the cyber detective in the South Wales Police. They've actually started a cyber experts forum, and they go out to small businesses, large businesses, whatever, and they encourage them to report cybercrime, because they've realized that a lot of the attitude is, well, you haven't bothered about it before, why should we bother now? And they've actually got sort of graduates that they employ from the forensics course, and they will help with the forensics discovery and things like that as well. So there is starting to be more of a movement towards the police taking cyber attacks more seriously, but I do agree that generally, yeah, having to gather forensics can take a lot of time and effort, and everything's got to be sort of logged and segregated, and you just want to get back up and running. And if the police are not actually going to do anything with it at the end of the day, what's the point? We do have clients. I know Cocho have had clients who have requested forensics. So there are clients that do take that element and want to be able to do it. So there's obviously some requirement for it, but it's still, the police need to catch up, really. So, but they are, like I said, there's this new forum in South Wales that is being driven by somebody who used to be part of Tarian, which was the cyber security force in the South Wales Police Force. And that, I'm waiting to see how it does, because they seem to be, particularly for small, you know, they've almost made it into like community policing as well. So they go into businesses, a bit like a community police officer would, and they sort of say, well, talk to me about your concerns when it comes to cyber. And they say, oh yeah, well, we had this one where, you know, I know somebody personally who was supposed to be transferring money to their financial advisor for investment in their pension. And somebody got in the middle, and he got a different email and saying, you know, oh, sorry, the account details have changed. Can you transfer to this? And it was supposed to be 40 grand, but luckily the bank only allowed transfer of 20. And then the financial advisor rang him and said, where's the money? Well, I've sent it to you. No, you haven't. Yeah. So, you know, and it's like, well, you need to report it. Yeah, but what are they going to do? Well, you'd still need to report it, you know. It's, you know, if the thing is, if we don't report crime, the statistics that are published, cybercrime's really low. It's like, yeah, because nobody's reporting it. It's a bit like other crimes, like rape and things, that they seem to be low, but then people were encouraged to report it, and then, you know, the statistics shot up, and it's like, oh, wow, you know, there's a lot of stabbings or a lot of shootings or whatever. And it's like, no, it's actually just, they've always been there. It's just that people are now reporting them, more willing to report them. So, yeah.
Hello. I wanted to ask about the security breaches that you reported at the beginning, and one company you referred to was LastPass.
Yes.
And you said it was because of the keys. What exactly did you mean by the keys? Would these be the sort of YubiKey type devices people are using?
Yeah.
So they are fallible?
They can be, yeah, they can be.
So you wouldn't advise them as a great,
well, to be fair, we use them. We use them. But I think if you have that and the credentials, which is what happened, then that's going to be a problem.
Okay, great. That's updated me. Thank you.
This is the thing. It's like, you know, if you've only got a password or you've only got a username, they're useless without one another. But if you've got two pieces together, then that's when it becomes vulnerable.
Can I just slip in another one? Because you said that Okta had security breaches since last November, and I actually got in touch with them because I was quite interested in what they were offering. And what would you say? I set up an account with them, but I haven't actually taken it any further because I felt I needed to do some more research and homework before I did go into that.
Yeah, I mean,
I still advise it.
Okta are a big name when it comes to, you know, the single sign-on stuff and that. And I've used them in my previous company, and you know, the product they provide is very good. But it's all about that third-party supplier management from your perspective and ensuring that they have put things in place, you know.
Yeah, because it's really sort of B2B security that I'm looking at all the time now, because I get very heavily phished, and at the moment I just keep reporting it to action and fraud all the time.
Yeah.
I'm a devil at that, but I check every single day, Sunday, Saturday, morning and evening, because I get so much, and it really is an arduous task, which is why I hate online and why I'm here, but I know that I have to persist with it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for listening, and I'm back again this afternoon, so do it all over again. So thanks very much, and thanks for your questions as well.